According to the Bank of Canada, 30% of all homeowners in Canada are investors. It might even be somebody that you know, but they probably don't know that they're actually a real estate investor. Hey there, and welcome to the weekly news recap here on Bald Prairie Real Estate. My name is Matthew Pfeifer, residential real estate agent in Regina. That's my trusted assistant, 𝗲𝗲𝗶𝗳𝗲𝗲𝗰, and this is where I go through the most interesting Canadian real estate news topics that I found last week, give you my thoughts and opinions on them. We're going to be going through the Stats Canada Jobs Report, a new and innovative way to solve Canada's housing crisis by reducing parking, the CMHC Housing Starts Report, those are down again, the February rent report from rentals.ca, and the Bank of Canada's report out saying that 30% of all homeowners in Canada are investors, and that is a very misleading headline. But before we get into it, let's start off with another one of my terrible bad dad jokes. Why did the pitcher have to go to jail? Because it was framed. If you have a terrible joke that I can use in a future episode, put it in the comments below. Let's get in this week's Canadian real estate news. The first report out here is the Stats Canada jobs numbers that just came out for the month. This jobs report is going to really muddy the waters for what the Bank of Canada is going to do next with interest rates. I still don't think they're going to cut interest rates before June if they do it all, and there's obviously a possibility they could increase interest rates. And where this is going to really muddy the waters is that the expectation was, I think, about 15,000 jobs added to the economy. Turned out, about 37,000 jobs were added. So right off the bat, okay, the economy's running really good. More jobs are being added. That's what Bank Canada will look at if they're just looking at the headline numbers, but they're obviously not. And when you dive down into those numbers, roughly 48,000 jobs were created in the public sector and 10,000 were lost in the private sector. An economy that's running really well isn't going to shed 10,000 jobs in the private sector. The other kind of headline number was that unemployment dropped. Now remember, unemployment can drop when you have more people that get jobs. It can also drop when the people that are looking for jobs reduces. So people just stop looking for jobs. And that's mainly what drove down unemployment this past month, was not more people getting jobs, more people stopping looking for jobs. Now, if you are thinking about buying or selling a house, if you're in Regina, of course, I'd love to help you out. 𝗲𝗲𝗶𝗳𝗲𝗏 will come along. She left. She didn't like the terrible joke. But if you're somewhere else in Canada, you don't already have a great real estate agent, I have a network of great real estate agents across the country. If you look in the description of this video, there's going to be a link into my calendar where I'm going to book you in for a call. I'm going to learn what's important to you in a house and also what's important to you in a real estate agent. I'm going to get you paired up with that perfect agent for you in your market. This next news article from Global News was talking about a way to solve Canada's housing crisis by reducing parking.
You can't park that there, mate.
I think this is a really interesting and innovative way to look at things in terms of when you build a house in Canada or you build an apartment, most municipalities have a minimum parking requirement. That makes sense. People are going to need to park their cars somewhere. So the idea here is, well, what if we just reduce minimums, have less parking? It takes up a substantial amount of space. 3 or 4 parking stalls is about the same size as a small bachelor suite. And if we take the total number of parking stalls in Canada versus even just the number of cars, it's like a 4-to-1 ratio. So 4 times as many parking stalls as we actually have cars in Canada. But again, you got to look a little bit deeper. If you have, for example, 1,000 stalls at my local Costco, well, that has no impact on the lack of housing in downtown Toronto because they have to build parking lots or etc. They have too many parking stalls. So we got to look at where those parking stalls are. And there's a little bit of another problem in terms of, well, what comes first? Lack of parking stalls or transit? Because if we're going to take parking stalls away and encourage people to take public transit, well, then of course you need the public transit. And that is obviously a very expensive thing for any level of government to do. And if you don't have the public transit, then people aren't going to buy these houses that rely on public transit to get around. Of course, there's the other side of it where this may work really well in Vancouver, which has a great transit network, or Toronto as well, and they have more mild climates. In some other parts of the country, that may not be practical at all because the transit isn't available. The climate doesn't work as well for mass transit. Sitting outside in front of a bus stop in Edmonton at -40, not really the most enjoyable thing that you want to do. The other side of it is, again, if you live in Edmonton and you need to visit family, very likely that family is 1 or 2 hours away by car. So you need that vehicle to actually go and visit family members. And because these cities are so far apart, especially in the prairies or in other rural areas across Canada. Next up, we've got CMHC's Housing Starts Report. And once again, housing starts are down. Once again, we see housing starts dropping in Canada. I've been talking about it for a while and we've been starting to see it. And simply put, many projects can't get started now because of high interest rates and high fees, etc. Make these projects just financially not viable right now. And we've seen the number now drop below 225,000 housing starts in Canada. Again, 6-month rolling average for the year. I wouldn't be surprised as we get into this year to see that number drop below 200,000. So these are not great numbers. Now, when we look at individual cities, Toronto saw numbers up 180%, while Montreal and Vancouver saw housing starts drop 29% and 55% respectively. Remember that one or two major projects starting in 1 month or another can really skew these numbers. You have a few hundred units that start in Montreal. That's going to make a big difference to their overall housing starts when there might only be a couple thousand in the entire year. So these numbers tend to wildly vary depending what happened the previous year. But the big trend line you need to take away is that housing starts are declining in Canada when we've got an increasing population. Now let's talk about the February rent report from rentals.ca. I know I sound like a broken record every time I talk about these rent reports because it seems every time it's an all-time high. That's the case once again. Average rent in Canada, $2,200 a month almost now, and that's a 10% year-over-year increase in addition to last year's 10.7% year-over-year increase. So 20-some% rent has increased in just the last couple of years. Anybody who's out trying to rent a place right now knows exactly what I'm talking about. Normally this time of year though, that rent kind of finds its bottom. November, December, January, sometimes February, rent tends to drop and then kind of flatten off and start taking back up again in the spring. So if you're looking for rent deals, that's generally the best time to find it. Vancouver saw a very small year-over-year decrease. Toronto saw a very small year-over-year increase. Now, if you want to look at these reports, I always put them in the description below so you can go and dig through it. Rentals.ca does a great job of breaking down the stats, way better than I could ever do in one of these videos, so take a look there. Interesting, when I was digging through it, the two cheapest places in Canada, Regina and Saskatchewan, well, those also saw some of the largest year-over-year rent increases, 13% respectively for both of those cities. Now, you're also paying less than $1,500 a month in rent in those two cities for even a 2-bedroom. Obviously way cheaper than even a single bedroom in Vancouver, but that's massive increases. 13% in those two cities year over year is huge. Now let's talk about the Bank of Canada saying that 30% of all home buyers in Canada. This is a headline I've seen put out many times, and it understandably causes a lot of frustration and anger from people that are unable to buy a house. They're saying all these investors are buying up these houses and I am unable to compete with them. And there's some truth to that, absolutely. But I want to read the Bank of Canada's own definition for what they consider an investor, and that's why I think this is a very misleading headline to start with. So I'm going to read it word for word here. This is: the central bank defines an investor as any buyer who took out a mortgage to buy a property while maintaining a mortgage on another home. So that means anybody who owns a cabin, has a secondary home somewhere else in Canada for whatever reason, maybe it's a vacation home, or they've bought a home for a family member like a child or an adult parent. Well, those are all considered investors. And obviously those aren't investors. We need to refine the definition for investors. Somebody who is buying a property as a pure investment property, yes, that should be considered an investor. Those buying cabins, they're not investors, and that skews the numbers as well here. But we also need to kind of take a step back from the emotional frustration when we just see the headline 30% of properties owned by investors and look at it a little bit logically. Roughly 30% of Canadians rent the home that they live in. Well, who else would own those homes but an investor? And there's many reasons why people would not want to purchase a home. Maybe you're a student. You're not going to probably buy a property if you're living somewhere else, not your home. You're going to rent for the short term. If you're a younger couple, a young person, you're probably not ready to buy. So you're not going to buy a house, you're going to rent. Maybe you're somebody who wants the lifestyle flexibility of renting. Those are all reasons why somebody would rent versus buy. And again, I understand the frustration with people saying, I can't compete with investors. That's an absolutely understandable frustration. But again, take that emotion out of it a little bit and look at this logically. We also do need investors in the market as well, again, to provide rental housing for those that don't want to purchase. But as well, I've talked about it when it comes to new construction starts. You need investor money to often get those projects started in the first place, or they don't get built at all. So yes, there's some negatives about investors, and I understand all that, but you have to understand investors are part of the market. They're going to be a part of the market. We just need to find that right balance. That wraps up the news for this week. Please, if you love this video, give this video a like. It really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed to Bald Prairie Real Estate, I don't know why you wouldn't. Hit that button right now. Go and subscribe for me. Leave me some comments below. I love chatting with you guys in that comment section below. And as always, thanks very much for watching.